love to kick it off with just, telling the students who you are and why you're up on this panel. So Tina, I'm going to go in at least what the grid looks like on my screen, but Tina, you first, please.
Sounds good. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Tina. I currently, I work with Silverton Partners here in Austin. So Silverton is a venture capital fund that focuses on seed and Series A investments. I also went to UT as well. I'm a UT alum. Grew up in Dallas, went to UT, went to business honors, now known as Canfield, and studied finance as well. First did consulting immediately out of school, then moved into strategy and then product management at Intuit, worked at a fund in the Bay Area called First Round Capital, and then most recently moved back here to Austin, and I'll be here for the long term.
Shantavia.
Hey everybody, I'm Shantavia Ward. I am the founder of Element Skin. Element is a modern facial studio in East Austin where we focus on clean beauty and bespoke botanical facials. I started my career in medicine, first as a registered nurse and then as a nurse practitioner. And I recently made a huge pivot to starting a business, running the business, and growing the business, but not only as a small business, but as a brand. And we've been here in Austin for about 5 years. The business has been open for a little over 1 year, and I'm really excited to share everything that I've learned with you guys.
Thank you. And Jessica?
Yes. Hi, Shantavia. I think I have to reach out to you about skin questions.
Yes.
I was just going to thank you, actually, Lesley, and the whole team for having me and for making me put on lipstick this evening. So I appreciate that. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Jess Gaffney. I'm the CEO and Executive Director with Women at Austin. Women at Austin is a 501c3 nonprofit in town. And our mission is to advance women entrepreneurs that are striving to scale their companies. And we focus a lot on the fundraising journey, which I'm just so thrilled that we're having this conversation tonight. It's so important to be having these conversations super early on. And just recently, we launched our very own angel network, Beam Angel Network, to connect investors with early stage founders. And Tina is one of our investors, one of our first investors. So it's a wonderful small world. Thanks for having me.
Empowered women, empower women. I love it. And this panel speaks to that. And I love the diversity of the entrepreneurial journey too that's represented here. So do y'all mind just sharing a little bit of what that journey has looked like? If you started a startup, if you're currently in a startup, if just kind of what that looks like for our students to know a little bit more about how you got to where you are. Tina?
Awesome. So I never started a startup, but I will tell you a little bit about how I ended up in this innovation sector. So when I first got out of school, I joined a consulting firm. I felt like it was kind of the thing you do after McCombs. You either go into consulting or banking. And so I went to McKinsey and I worked on a number of projects. None of them were in the tech industry. And still, I realized that every single company was converging to tech regardless of their industry. And so I wanted to be more at the forefront of tech. And so when I was leaving McKinsey, I joined Intuit. And my thought was I had always thought about starting my own company. And the role I pursued was product management because I've always thought any sort of startup CEO is effectively a product manager. And I made that transition while I was at Intuit. I first started on a strategy project, trying to figure out what the next mid-level QuickBooks product would be, and then stayed on as a product manager to launch it. I think for me, I realized in my operating time that the more you get in depth into a product, the more myopic the day-to-day becomes. And I wanted to be back at a high-level strategic role, but at only focus on tech. And I had a good mentor at the time who had started his own venture fund, and then I kind of learned the ropes of venture from him. decided to leave Intuit, join First Round, and then left First Round because ultimately I want to raise a family here in Austin. And so now I'm here at Silverton here in Austin.
Well, we're so glad you're back in Austin. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, it's nice to be home.
Shantavia, what about you? What is your journey?
Yeah, it's an interesting journey. Can everybody hear me okay? I had a little technical difficulty on the audio.
You,
okay, perfect. So when I wasn't living out my wildest dreams, inspiring women through skincare, I was saving lives as a nurse practitioner. And in that past medicine, I've seen a lot. I worked in medical aesthetics, cosmetic surgery, plastic surgery, and I realized that we were just contributing to a broken societal beauty norm and encouraging people to fix what they thought was wrong with themselves or what social pressures perceived as wrong. And I just felt like that was a message that was negatively impact emotional well-being, mental health, and it just didn't have, a good outcome on someone's own well-being as it related to their skin. So I created Element to change that narrative. I just didn't want to be a part of that message anymore. And I wanted to create a space where we could celebrate the uniqueness of skin and just really love the skin that they were in and just elevate well-being, but through skincare. So we wanted to do that, and that's exactly what I set out to do. It wasn't easy at all. Obviously, pivoting from nursing into beauty, it was a huge pivot for me. I stepped down in my medical practice. I had to do the petition program. We bootstrapped, brought some money from my savings, but it was a piece that I'm really proud to say has made us one of the top destinations for clean beauty in East Austin. So it was definitely, not in the cards as I was growing up or was in college thinking that this is what I was going to do, but I just listened to my heart and I did exactly what I wanted and what I knew that people needed.
Oh, I love it. Listen to your heart. It's sometimes so hard to do, but always the right thing to do. Jessica, your background's interesting because you've worked in nonprofit and for-profit, and I'd love to know kind of also in startups, right? So I'd love to know kind of how your journey has led to where you're at with women in Austin, and especially the Being Angel Network.
Yeah. Well, I have always thought of myself as an entrepreneur, even when I was like 13 and had my babysitting business. So I think it's because in my family, you're either a teacher or an entrepreneur. So I was hoping maybe I'd teach somehow, but while I was being an entrepreneur. And so I have tried to start 3 businesses now. But I started my career actually in fashion in for-profit marketing. And I started a collegiate clothing line at the time as well. And then I, fast forward about 8 years, I kind of felt like my soul was dying a little bit when I was working on my last project with Pringles, which I love. But for me, I was very passionate about sustainable food and farming. And I basically decided to do a 180 and join a sustainable food nonprofit in New York City, which is where I'm from, New York. And so I spent 6 years in nonprofit, and then I moved to Austin about 6 years ago, and I was 6 months pregnant. I had my first child, and I saw very quickly how challenging it was to find a high quality, flexible role that I was looking for, and couldn't believe that that was the state of affairs for women. So I had to, really work on that problem and go after it. And so I worked on a nonprofit for a startup for 2 years called Pro Mama. And I participated in Div Inc., which is a wonderful accelerator in town. And it was a super valuable experience. And I was at a pivot point, and that's when this opportunity came around. And I felt like I just couldn't turn it down because my personal value is to support women professionally and personally. And I felt like this role would allow me to do that exponentially. And so I haven't looked back. It's been about a year, and we are already doing it, but we're on our way to doing it through fundraising and directly connecting women to capital. So really, really grateful for the opportunity and for my journey that I thought sometimes was too much of a, I don't know, it wasn't a straight line, and that's what I wanted. I was really jealous of my friends that knew they wanted to be a doctor from when they were like a little kid and just went straight on that path. And I kind of had to find my way. And but I gained a lot from all those different experiences. So,
well, speaking about funds for females and especially, capital, can you talk a little bit more about the Beam Angel Network and kind of what that is and how it came to be?
Sure. So when I joined Women at Austin about a year ago, and I should mention that Women at Austin has been around actually for 6 years, and Jan Ryan was our founder. And when I joined about a year ago, I had some really great conversations with our parent company, Notley, which is a social impact investment firm. And we knew early on that we really wanted to have impact when it came to women founders and find out what their biggest pain points were. So we did focus groups with 60 women entrepreneurs. We did surveys, and we continued to do both qualitative and quantitative research to determine the biggest barriers for growth. And over and over again, we basically confirmed that early stage capital was the biggest barrier for them getting to that next level. And then, at the same time, we also saw the numbers, the reality of women fundraising at the venture capital level. And, it's just so small. It's like 2 to 4%, depending on what stat you're looking at. And then if you're a Black woman, it's like 0.0006%, like almost statistically impossible, which is just, there's so many, I have so much to say about that. But what we realized was that one of the reasons that the numbers were low, there's a lot of reasons, systemic racism and the system and, how women are perceived, all those things. But what we realized is that there weren't enough women in the pool that were ready to be funded. So we decided to create an angel network, which helps women founders earlier in their fundraising journey, when they're, right after friends and family, when they're in pre-seed, seed. And that angel investment will hopefully propel them to then go on to, let's say, raise a round with Tina at a fund. So it's really kind of one of the earlier steps in the process. So we launched Beam this month, and we closed applications last Wednesday. We have 102 of them. We're super psyched. We have almost 30 investors, and we're moving, grooving.
We are super psyched for you. And, so much of the reason for today and this panel is to help students understand what the different fundraising options are for them. So obviously angel investing, venture capital, bootstrapping, crowdsourcing. So if y'all specifically have questions about angel investments and angel funding and angel networks, please, see Jessica and the Women in Austin session that's after this. And so with that, another, source of funding potentially is venture capital. So Tina, what is venture capital? If you were to explain it to your grandma, what is venture capital and what should our students know about it at this point?
Yeah, so I think venture capital has kind of this stereotype as being the only capital available out there for startups, and that's just not true. I think any sort of startup or any sort of new business should really critically think about when they decide to go after venture capital, because the thing to understand is that venture capital itself is a business, and that business has a very specific business model. And so venture capital is really a source of money raised from other people. And when you get money from a VC, they're generally taking it out of this fund that they've raised, which other people have put money in. And so when you do get venture capital, the thing that you're giving away isn't really like interests or like anything like that. You're giving away equity, because how the venture capitalist makes money is in, say, at least in my position at the very early stage where I'm investing in seed Series A, I would expect in, say, 5 to 10 years for that equity to be worth something, hopefully. But I think there's some nuances to understand here. And the way I could simplify it is part of my calculus and the return that I'm going to get is that, say, 70 to 80% of the businesses I invest in are going to fail. And so ultimately, the 3 or 4 successes that I have in the portfolio of companies, I need those 3 to 4 businesses to return not just the money I lost from the other businesses that failed, but also enough money to give back to my own investors the amount of return that they expect. And so venture capital is generally a really risky category of investing. And so when I take money from my investors, which are traditionally called LPs, they expect a higher amount of return. And so Silverton usually delivers something like 400 to 500% at the end of a fund's life. And what that implies is that if I'm exiting, say, only a portion of a portfolio in that fund, the amount that each successful company needs to exit for needs to be somewhere in the $300, $400, $500 million range. And so what I'm trying to say in that kind of long statement is, as a startup or as a new business, for you to decide to take venture capital, you have to kind of align to that business model and potentially be one of those businesses that wants to make, say, $100 million in revenue or more a year in order to make that return. And that is, I think that is like a nuance that isn't necessarily that transparent from the outside looking in.
Well, thank you so much for giving us that insight. And Shantava, you're like in it right now. You mentioned being a nurse and pivoting to starting your own business. I mean, how do you, like, where do you begin and how do you navigate the scene of, you know, what funding makes sense for you and where you're at with funding specifically with your enterprise?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've always been one to really just create my own path and find unique ways to explore the things that excited me. So that's what I did. I found myself just kind of learning the ropes, typically through like free events in Austin. I'm sure you all know this by now, but Austin startup scene is booming, and I just used it to my advantage. My story is definitely not linear. You know, I do come from medicine, pivoted into beauty. It was a huge change for me. I mean, I had to learn everything I could about business. So I'm in my 30s. I don't have access to great programs like this. And I didn't come from a family of entrepreneurs. My idea for Element was a spa. So I was shot down by potential stakeholders whenever I talk about it. What I did have was grit and a burning desire to create a new beauty narrative and to just really develop the business and what I knew that beauty needed and what the future of beauty was. So I took my idea, even if nobody believed in me, you know, I believe in it. And I would share it with anybody who would listen. I went to all the events in Austin, and I basically would network, go to different information sessions with the intention to gain as much knowledge as I could as possible, and just that I was learning into my field. So into beauty, I would learn all these things about tech businesses, but I would just take it and translate it and make it work for me in my industry. And then, you know, I was even I actually tried to apply to a UT event for the same program. I think it was early last year. And they're like, no, this is just for students. And I'm like, but I need to get this info. But yeah, one of the sessions, actually a lot about what Tina was saying, I've just learned along the way is that they're talking about venture capital, angel investing, and just crowdfunding and all these things. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to get this money from a venture capitalist. And I learned that Element was just not in a position to be invested in. But that was good for me because, you know, what that investor told me was you needed to prove your concept. And I went out there and I did exactly that. And and we did crowdfunding. We were successfully able to raise $13,000 for us to take our concept into a flagship. So now, you know, we've got skin in the game, and it's really been, I would say, a really great experience just navigating the Austin startup. Even though I wasn't in the tech industry, I would just get all that info and just apply it back to what I was doing. And then I leaned into our clientele and into our audience and into our following for support to help build our business through crowdfunding. And it was the best thing that I could have done for the business.
I love it. Lean in. I mean, Austin's community, the startup ecosystem here is so rich. And I think you're right to take all the opportunities. And we're working on making these resources from the WEL Institute accessible for everyone. And, you know, how lucky for our students to be able to learn from alums and community members like you that are in it, you know, but also looking out for the next generation too. That's coming up. And speaking of the next generation, because I actually get this question a lot with the students that I interact with, but, you know, tell me what is advice that you wish you would have known before starting out on, you know, an idea or a venture. Like, what advice would you have given yourself, like at an early age or at early stage of your venture? And so I'm not sure if anyone has a quick knee jerk to that, but we've got just a few minutes left.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah,
actually.
go.
I would tell my older self or my younger self just to jump into fear, jump into everything that made me afraid, and literally fail until I won. I think that life's greatest teacher is experience, and you grow through what you go through.
Oh, I love it. I'm hoping my interns are taking these for our tools that are going to go out. That was great. Just
I have a similar one. It's about having a growth mindset, because it's the same thing where I think there's a lot of fear there. And like for me personally, when I didn't succeed at the companies that I started, there was a lot of shame involved. And now, you know, now that I'm so wise, I can really though look back at those and say like they were awesome learning experiences. And guess what? I did research and I figured out that there wasn't a product market fit, or there wasn't, you know, a market for what I was trying to offer. And therefore, I made the decision to not move forward with it, which is actually smart and a great way for me to learn for the next time. So for me, it's like looking back at those as like great learning experiences and a notch in my belt instead of something shameful that I don't want to talk about because it didn't amount to what I wanted it to be.
I was trying to go look at my LinkedIn because I shared a quote the other day that rings so true to what you're saying, Jessica, and that is, you know, when you start over, you're not starting from nothing, you're starting from experience. And I think that if you view what you've done in the past as experience and not failures, or just to really look at failure and the beauty in it and the necessity of it, you know, and if you know anything about Kendra Scott's story, you know, those are the lessons that lead you to success. And I feel like if I were to give advice to students, it's be coachable, be receptive and be coachable. And Shantavia, you speak so true to this, but know your why, right? Lead with your why, and you can't go wrong in any of the decisions that you make. So I think first and foremost, get really, really clear about your why. So be coachable and be your why. That's what I would say. Tina, what would you have told yourself in your 20s?
Yeah, I really, both of what you said really resonated. I do think it's important to just get started instead of take forever to write a perfect business plan. I think the one thing I do see a lot of founders do is I feel like sometimes in your head, in order to get to an answer or test something, it feels like you have to build a whole website, build a whole product before you can validate anything. And honestly, sometimes you just have to sit with who you think your customer will be and kind of understand their workflows. There's very hacky ways to get a sense for demand or other things that you want to validate before you go out there and build an app. And so I think my advice, if anyone's looking to start a startup, is just figure out what are those really hacky things you can do, like create a website, set up a wait list to figure out demand. There's quick, easy things you can do that don't require a lot of effort, and that could save you a lot of time on the back end.
Well, as we're about to close out, I wanted to throw out and see if anyone wants to speak to empowerment or what empowerment means to you. If you've got like a word or two, what does empowerment mean to you?
That's a philosophical question.
I'm also waiting to see what Nina's going to say for us to get off the stage. So
I mean, I feel like for me, when I at least try to empower female investors or founders, it's an act of acknowledging their fears and anxiety and giving them the encouragement and some push towards fear in a different way and turning it into courage. So that's kind of how I feel it captures empowerment.
And I also think that it's just, you know, just being like fearless in pursuit of whatever it is that sets your soul on fire, and just being confident in that and understanding that your perspective is just invaluable. And just be empowered by that.
I love that.
Yeah, I agree with both of those things. And I would add to just like the freedom to never settle, you know, like you were saying, Lesley, about your why, like to never settle for things that don't align with your core values. So that's another way of thinking of empowerment for me.
Yeah, know your values and invest in, you know, in those values, and what are your non-negotiables, right?
Yes, I actually always say honor your values from an empowered stance.
Ooh, yeah.
Just like be clear on that, and just like stand in that, and don't bargain that for anything.
I like that.
I do
I'm gonna
too.
use that if you don't mind.
Well, we're going to open up to Q&A and see what some of our attendees might want to know from y'all. So I'm looking at the stage chat and the event chat to see if we have any questions. I'm not sure if they're coming through, but we'll just wait just a couple more seconds and see if anyone has any Q&A to put in the chat. You can put it in the stage chat. And there's also the event chat that we can see. But yeah, let us know if you've got any questions or anything that you'd love to know in the next 1 or 2 minutes.
We don't bite. Ask us questions.
Okay, we've got one from Beth. What are the most important skills you've gained through your experiences?
I think for me, it's just being consistent and working hard. Consistency and hard work will always win. It will always put you on top. And it's just been like my guiding light in everything that I do.
I really believe that building good habits is one of those things that elevates your game over time. And I think the other thing is at least what I gather from my initial experiences is without having a lot of industry expertise, being able to feel confident and engaging on any topic. I think that's super important. And the fear of not having that expertise shouldn't stop you from speaking up.
I totally agree with that. Shantava, you've got a specific one. What was your turning point for your business?
The turning point for my business, I think it was, God, that's a great question. I don't know specifically, but I feel like it was maybe our crowdfunding campaign. You know, it really allowed us to have the capital to be able to expand not only into a new location, but to expand our social media efforts and to just grow our operations. And then we were able to really just take a deep dive more into our why, and to be able to back that up with some financial support for us to be able to do that, I think was a big turning point for us.
Well, ladies, thank y'all. This was so fun, and we so appreciate your expertise. And students, remember that you can interact with these wonderful perspectives in the sessions and get to know a little bit more about Tina, Shantavia, and Jessica. Thank y'all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much for being here and chatting with me. Today we have 3 amazing women with us. Rachel is here. She's the SVP of Core Experience at OneDrop. Monica is the co-founder and co-CEO of the Etho. And Carrie is general partner at WEL Ventures. So if you want to just take a couple seconds each and maybe introduce yourself a little bit more, but also just share, your thinking when it comes to entrepreneurship and the students and why you're here today. I'll go. Rachel, why don't you start first?
Hey, so yes, I'm VP or SVP of Core Experience at OneDrop. And so I basically manage everything that touches the user experience. It's the product, it's the behavioral science, it's the data science, it's our UX design, and even our communications and PR. So basically like literally everything that would touch a user's experience from the second they see the first marketing asset all the way through to the customer support stuff. I was employee number 5 at OneDrop, so I didn't found it myself, but I feel kind of like a founder because I've been there from the very beginning and I've worn so many hats at this company. This is my first startup. Before OneDrop, I was working as an attorney representing big pharma in patent litigation. My background is in law and chemical engineering, actually. So working at OneDrop, which is a digital health company for people with diabetes, was quite a big leap. But I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 7 years old. So it really aligned and resonated with me quite a lot. I'm here because I'm really excited about supporting entrepreneurs, people with big ideas who just need help kind of getting them off the ground. And I'm particularly interested in women founders because I feel that they are underfunded and underrepresented in this space. And I want to help change that.
Awesome. Thank you. Monica?
Hi, well, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started making bracelets when I was 7 years old. And from then I started 5 companies and 2 nonprofits. So I feel I have it in my blood. I'm a fierce supporter of women and women entrepreneurs. It's very challenging to be a women entrepreneur, not only because of the funding, that is a huge part of it, but also we have to really multitask to be able to keep up with our lives and striving in business. For me, the goal is giving access to markets to 100 million women across the globe by 2030. So I think that the biggest thing you can do for the empowerment of women is starting with putting money in their pockets. When they can sell their products, when they can make money out of their ventures, that's the beginning of empowerment.
Carrie, what about you?
Sure. So I am a general partner at WEL Ventures, which is a venture capital fund, much like Tina was talking about at Silverton. But we specifically focus on women-led companies. So it's actually part of our investment thesis. Not only are we feminists and do we think that women are amazing, we actually believe we will make more money as venture capitalists by investing in women. There's a lot of data that shows when you have diversity in your team, and they mean it more broadly than just gender, but we're specifically focused on gender for this fund at least, your company will outperform financially. And yet, unfortunately, to date, most of venture capital has been men until relatively recently, and most of those men invest in men. And so the data is still pretty bad for women. So we think there's a gap and an opportunity for us to have a better performing venture capital fund by specifically focusing on women. We happen to also look at the fact that women are making a lot of buying decisions in the field. And so 85% of consumer purchase decisions are made by women and 80% of healthcare decisions are made by women. So we also think by focusing very specifically in those markets, those women on the executive teams of those companies will bring more perspective to build better products, to know how to market to those women, to know how to, actually, connect with them from customer service point of view. And so again, those companies will actually do better because they're focused on women. So from an experience point of view, before my partner Sarah and I started this fund, I used to run an accelerator. And so I helped launch about 150 early stage companies at the accelerator. A lot of those were students, well, not a lot, but there were a lot of people that were kind of either in college or transitioning out of college or grad school. So I've worked with a lot of early stage entrepreneurs. And then before that, I had a 20-year career in early stage software companies and internet companies. And launched my own travel startup. So I've been on both sides of the equation. And honestly, launching a brand new venture capital fund is a lot like a startup. And so we're entrepreneurial even with our venture fund. We had to go raise the $20 million that we invest from investors, which is a lot like raising money from a venture capital fund. So obviously, I'm at this event because everything I do is about female founders. But also that I'm, used to that early stage and working with students at their stage. And so ultimately, we hope that you guys grow up into companies that we could fund. We only invest in, 12 companies per fund or like 4 per year. So probably not this week. But it's really about building the pipeline and helping women entrepreneurs be ready and fundable when they want that.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. I am really honored just to be on the stage with you. So we only have about 13 minutes left before we have Q&A. So I just want to dive right into the questions. And if you don't mind trying to keep it short and sweet, that would be super helpful so we can get to everyone. So Rachel, let's start out with you. What compelled you to become an angel investor, and what was the process for that? And I should mention that Rachel is one of our first investors in Beam Angel Network.
Yeah, so I felt specifically compelled to become an angel investor to women founders. I agree with everything Monica and Carrie just said. I think that we really need to support more women because it's just the smart thing to do. Will better serve everyone, and particularly 50% of the population, so there's no reason not to. And I feel that women are uniquely capable of solving women's problems. When they are underfunded, you see not as much innovation in like spaces that are specifically for women. I often think a lot about the women's health space because I'm in the health space in general, and I see so many instances where we're talking about really the reference man, which is like a 6 foot, 180-pound white male, and that doesn't really represent anybody here. So I feel really passionate about solving, women's health concerns, developing new solutions, innovating in the spaces that women are in, and really just giving them the same degree of innovation that we've seen in so many other spaces. So that's why I wanted to become an angel investor. I really feel that putting money in women's pockets is really the way to empower them and in turn improve life for all of us. And becoming an investor. How did we do that?
Yeah, just 1 or 2 tips I would say for like if someone wants to become an investor as a goal in the future, what can you do to prepare to become one? A good one.
Well, I think that really understanding what founders are dealing with, I think having a lot of empathy and understanding of the situation they're in and knowing how to speak their language is helpful. I mean, the founders do so much to convey their ideas, but these are people often, especially when you're younger and earlier on in your experience, that you need help. That's why you're there. Like you need the investment, but you also need the support. You need some education. You need some kind of shepherding through the process. And I think that a good investor provides all of those things. It's not just the check. It's the check, of course, but in addition, a lot of other support that is needed, like from a marketing perspective. And even like, honestly, I've seen so many people make very bad early hires. And that's something that I think a lot of people could use a lot of help with. So definitely understanding what founders are dealing with and their issues and being empathetic. And the other bit is, I guess, just understanding how to make the money to actually be in a position to make investments. That would be the other thing. Obviously you can go and start your own fund and kind of get investors that way, get funding that way. But, it's tough. That's what I think. I feel very fortunate to be in a position now where I'm able to do this. But, that's really step number one. And, there are lots of different paths to get there. And being an accredited investor has a certain requirements. So I would also just look into what the SEC requires. That's usually step one to joining any fund.
Yeah, that is true. We actually have the requirements listed on our website at womenataustin.org in our Beam section, if you're curious about it. Thank you, Rachel. So Monica, you formally studied education when you were in college. So how did you learn what you needed to learn around business and raising capital for all of your successes?
Oh, I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family. So yes, I studied education and I love kids, but I saw how everyone around me started business. So that's how I kind of learned the ropes. You launch your first startup, you're literally learning as you grow. And then for the second one, there's a certain number of things that you already know, but if you're doing in a different area, then you keep learning. So it was a lot of having great advisors, being willing to be very creative, and learning from failure.
I'm curious specifically about the finances, because I know that's an area often that women struggle with. So since you didn't have a finance background, was it just learned by doing it again, or was there something specific?
No, it was learned by doing it. And I've always been very good at numbers, so that helped a lot. And I'm very organized and structured. So building the structures of companies is something that is easy for me. The fundraise, the raising money was the challenge. I overcame the fear of that when I founded the 2 nonprofits in Austin. I had to raise for them. It's not the same when you raise money for your company that when you're raising money from a non-for-profit. It's easier because you're raising it for the cause. So the first 3 companies, I bootstrapped them. I started raising for the 4th. And these companies, we're raising money from development funds. And that's wholly different ballgame. So it's been a learning curve. And you start with angels, and then you start growing for that. And I think that's what I love being an entrepreneur is I'm always learning new things. But the mentors and the advisors around me make all the difference.
Yeah, that's a wonderful tip, to get mentors and advisors as early as possible, right?
Yes. And I also mentor women, and they come to me and said, my company is too small to have a board or advice. And I said, no, get some advisors and form an advisory board that it's not as formal as you were a big company, but that will be a deal breaker for you.
Such good advice. Thank you. So Carrie, can you share with us a little bit more about what a typical day usually looks like for you as a venture capitalist and what that means?
They actually vary depending on the stage of where you're at. So a typical day, if we've already raised our fund, is different than when we're fundraising. So I'll just sort of explain the different functions of a VC. So the first thing we have to do is have the capital to invest. So one of the big differences between a VC and an angel, I would be literally writing it out of my checkbook. And so I get to make my own decisions as Carrie, and that's really liberating in some ways, but it's also really risky because it's all my money. And if I lose it, which is, high risk in these kinds of early stage deals, it's mine. So as a VC, we raise money from other people. And so we've raised $20 million. We had to put some of our own money in to show that we had, skin in the game and that we were motivated to get a good return. But we have a lot of fundraising. And while it might take up to 6 months to raise a round as a startup, it can take about 2 years to raise the funding, or a year to 2 years for a fund. So some of it is meeting with your potential investors, which are called LPs. And they tend to be entities that can write bigger checks than individual angels can. And people who want us as professionals to spend all day, every day, working on, finding companies and supporting them. So the other thing we have to do is find deals. And so that's called deal flow or deal sourcing. And so we might do that by showing up at an event where startups are pitching, or we get a lot, like 90% of ours come from introductions from other people. So we have to spend a lot of time knowing the other venture capitalists and angel investors that might have deals so that they think of us when there's a company that looks like it's interesting in funding. And then we also do some proactive efforts like showing up at, startup accelerators and kind of looking for their companies. And we have to interview them, get to know them, hear their pitch deck, and then decide if they're interesting enough to dig deeper. And so, there's a first meeting might be great. And then when you get, to learn the business better, you're just going to decide whether you're going to invest or not. And then after you've invested, depending on the venture capital fund, you may actually spend a decent amount of time actually supporting that company. So you might have a formal role on the board, which is different from an advisory, board, like where you actually have fiduciary responsibility for the company, or you just may be trying to help that company out in order for them to eventually be successful, right? So you might help with hiring, like Rachel mentioned, like I might actually interview all the key hires that a CEO is trying to make for their startup. I'm reviewing the financials. I'm helping with the strategy. I'm making connections to my network. And ultimately trying to get that company, in our scenario, usually sold to another big company in that 5 to 10 year window that Tina was talking about in the first session, so that I can make my money back to give it back to the investors so that hopefully they made in aggregate with all the companies we invest in, at least a 3x return on their money in the window of that fund. And so there's different stages of things that we're doing, either looking for new companies, supporting companies we're already involved in, talking to other people in the network so we can hear about new companies, and also meeting potential investors who are going to put the money in for us to manage on their behalf.
That's super helpful. So just to review and make sure everyone kind of understands, because I know this is a lot to navigate, is when you're an angel investor, it's an individual who's investing their own money. And then when it's a fund, that fund is raising money from individuals and entities, and that fund then makes the decisions on behalf of them, and the people pay them to do that. And obviously they're experts at doing that, right? Awesome. So let's, I know we probably only have like 1 or 2 more minutes. So let's do a lightning round of, if you can give one piece of advice to aspiring entrepreneurs in this event right now, especially young women, what would you say? Your best one piece of advice.
Find a mentor.
Awesome. Rachel? You're on mute.
Second guess yourself and just take chances. Give yourself as many at-bats as possible, because you can't score if you're not out there.
Awesome. Carrie?
And I'll just do one specific to women. Don't fall for imposter syndrome and that you don't have the capacity to do it. And understand that when you are in a sales environment or a VC pitch environment, you are selling the best case scenario of what you think you can do. So think big. I think Jessica mentioned this in the first round, that growth mindset. That may be different than the plan that you feel 100% confident that you're going to make, that you're going to commit to delivering, which is probably the plan you're going to put, your budget you're going to put in place with your board. You are not lying by saying, this is how big I think it can be, versus, okay, but this is how I'm like 100% sure I'm going to make it. And make sure in those environments where you're trying to sell the big picture that you do that, because the guys are doing it. And it is unfortunately a gendered thing that culturally we taught the difference. The good news is that being good at predicting what you can make makes you really good at operating success, but it makes you potentially lose in the sales or pitching environment. And so knowing the difference between those things is important.
That's such a good point, Carrie. It's so true. There's so many studies about even the questions that come out come at men versus women that are much more vision focused for men and much less vision focused for women. So you have to make sure that you are empowered to deliver that message no matter what you're asked, right?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I know that was a quick one. Thank you so much.
All right. Yes. So we have maybe 4 minutes for Q&A. So I'll go ahead and field that for our panelist. And then after that, I'll ask the panelists to exit stage left, and I'll do some closing remarks. So we have a specific question for Carrie. What's the best way to approach VCs? And feel free to attendees to add more questions to the stage chat.
Yeah, so in aggregate, when we're talking about all VCs, through an introduction, and unfortunately, that's one of the problems with women because we don't have the same networks. We didn't go to prep school and play lacrosse with the guy who's a VC, and they tend to like focus on their networks of their, fancy schools where they hang out with guys in bars. And so you've got to figure out how to network to find someone who knows them. I will say our fund and a lot of people that are being more thoughtful about it around diversity in general are trying to be much more open at the top of the funnel. So you can reach me by going to our website and just submitting your deal, and we will look at you. A lot of old-fashioned VC funds don't, if it doesn't come through a warm intro, they assume that means you couldn't find a way in, and therefore there's something tainted about you. So know that that's how it's traditionally done. But you frankly would probably prefer an investor who's a lot more open to meeting you and is thinking differently. So, know that there's what you might have to suffer through versus what you might actually target and prefer.
And also just to build on that really quickly, it's so important too then to start growing your network when you're really young so that you're not, looking for those contacts when you want to start fundraising. I'm sure Monica can agree to that. It's important then that you can then tap into those connections that you already have further down the road.
Yeah. And then another question for Carrie, and anyone else feel free to add on afterwards. What makes businesses stand out choosing who to offer VC funding to? What do you look at, or what things are turnoffs?
Yeah, so this is like a really important differentiation between seed stage investing, which both Tina and I do, versus later stage. So if you're a growth investor, you're looking at the numbers, like how's this company doing, how much revenue do they have, et cetera. At the seed stage, it's much more art. And so I like to say it's sort of like if real estate is location, 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 startups at the seed stage are people, people, people. At the end of the day, it's do I think this person and the people around them have complementary skill sets, but that are going to hustle. They're going to listen. So there's like this qualitative balance between being stubborn enough to keep pursuing an opportunity that they see that others might not, but also being mentorable and being open to what the advisors tell you and listening to the customer. And so there's a lot of qualitative stuff there. It's helpful if you had the lemonade stand or whatever, back in the day, and you've got a track record of entrepreneurial experience. But it's also helpful if you have like a smart, degree next to your name, and there's all these things that we kind of weigh together. But at the end of the day, it's people, and that is where networks can be really a big part of how investors choose people, because it's about relationships. And do I want to work with this person on their board for the next 5 to 7 years to help them, be successful, and do they want to work with me? So it's a lot more soft and qualitative at the early stage. Of course, we care about how big the market is and all these other things. But at the end of the day, if the people thing isn't there, the rest of this stuff doesn't matter.
Yeah.